Next up, we have the panel session on product design, and I'd like to introduce the moderator, Scott Snibbe. Scott and I met about 2 years ago at Designers and Geeks. He gave a talk there. He's done a whole lot of really interesting things. He's currently the founder and CEO of Eyegroove, which is a very cool app that you should download and check out. He started, I think, his career as one of the developers of After Effects, which many of you have probably used, and he's gone on to do some interesting work with that. Interactive design work, particularly with music. He designed Bjork's Biophilia app, which is a beautiful, beautiful iPad app that I highly recommend you check out. He's done work with James Cameron. It was interesting. We saw some of the Avatar stuff. He did some augmented reality software with James Cameron. Yeah, it's good. Let's see, still figuring out the mic over there? Let's bring him on up. Come on up, guys. Yeah, great.
Sorry, I was adjusting my mic.
This is Scott, so let's welcome him up. Thanks.
Great. So I'd like our panelists to please come on up. And Joe asked me to let you guys introduce yourselves, so it'd be nice to hear your stories, although I already know them. I think we know about Brian a bit. So you want to start with you, Jeff?
I have the honor of going first. Cool. So my name's Jeff Avalon. About 6 years ago, myself and a couple buddies launched a company called IdeaPaint. Basically what it is, it's a paint that goes on any smooth surface you want, and it transforms it into a high-performance dry erase writing surface, just like your whiteboard. We're actually sitting today in one of our largest customers, Autodesk, so thank you all you Autodesk folks out there. Favorite thing about the product is it's extremely simple. It makes collaboration frictionless throughout the designed environment. And today we're actively distributed in 40 countries around the world. Our main method of distribution is working with the leading architecture and design firms from around the globe on the newest, most trend-forward designs in office space and schools. And fun fact, my first business, I'm also a commercial lobsterman on the side out of New England.
Yeah. Wow, good lobster roll. Well, yeah, I'm a huge fan of IdeaPaint. My walls upstairs are just on 3 sides. They're all IdeaPaint.
Thank you.
Yeah. You guys know me.
So I'm Erin Reid. I'm a UX designer with Salesforce. I think we also occupy this building here. Oh. Thank you. Hello. Yeah, hi. So I'll just start again. Erin Reid. So I'm UX designer at Salesforce. Previous life as an industrial designer out of Australia. Also been a software architect as well. So lived on both the development side as well as architecture, and now back onto the user side of things. Come back to the Bay Area now for a couple months, and I guess getting used to being back as opposed to startups into a large business and kind of moving a very large ship in the right direction. So.
I'm Ethan Imboden. I think this is working. And a bit of a circuitous path. I started out as an electrical engineer, computer science undergraduate, spent a little bit of time in big science working on the Human Genome Project, then looked for something that was a bit more, I guess, creative, artistic. And I ended up in graduate school in industrial design. Worked for a number of years as an industrial designer with a variety of different firms on everything from toothbrushes to a lot of staplers, a lot of flat panel monitors, a lot of things that had to be in iMac colors. Thank you for that, Apple. And then the last place that I worked was Frog Design, and that was in 2002. I quit to start my own independent design consulting firm. And I was approached by a number of different people, 3 potential clients, all unrelated to one another, who all asked me to look into sex products, which was new and different and surprising to me. So I went to a trade show and discovered a whole world that had yet to be touched by design. And this is at a moment when I was really feeling like design was being applied almost as a sheen, very cookie cutter over a lot of different industries, and I was a bit disillusioned. And here was an area that, when I stepped back and got over my prudishness, seemed incredibly important, incredibly intimate, and incredibly deserving and of attention and design. And so I launched a company called Jimmy Jane, which today is one of the leading premium sex product manufacturers in the world. And that company actually was acquired earlier last year. and I joined Frog Design again, in this case, continuing to bring together my love for entrepreneurship and design as the head of venture design, working with entrepreneurs to launch companies.
Fantastic. So it's a pretty amazing group of people, and a number of them have all taken that plunge of trying to take a product to market. And so I think a lot of the questions want to focus around that area of that experience and what you learned from it. So I thought I'd start out with a question. I've often been shocked by how different my own vision of a product that I may have designed is even the very first day after it launches. So I think sometimes it's almost like the difference between singing in the car versus singing in front of an audience, you know, somehow you hear yourself differently. So I wanted to see if you guys could talk a little bit about a time where your ideas about the product changed massively at that moment after launch. Maybe it wasn't the first hour, maybe it was, but talk about how having an audience changes your vision of a product, and then right when it's released, initial version. So anybody can start.
I've got a funny story back when I was working in advertising industry, kind of jaded, you know, working on grinding out a lot of projects. And this idea came along as for Tourism Queensland in Australia. So they decided they were trying to promote tourism globally. And I think it was around the time where sort of, you know, everyone wanted to do viral videos, that sort of thing. And we ended up pitching this idea of the best job in the world. So it was about 2009, I remember. And the idea was basically that you could work on an island in Australia for 6 months. You got paid to do so. You got to hang out. You were the caretaker of this island. And so it was basically a bit of flash work back at the time. You know, you upload your video, which is kind of I guess, hey, I want this job type of promotion, and we sort of thought, okay, we'll see how we go with this. So within a month, I think there was, after launch, this was, I think we had 35,000 people upload their videos from 200 companies, 200 countries, I should say. And I think in the end, it was like $200 million sort of net run for Tourism Australia for this competition. This guy from England won, and he lived on an island, got stung by a jellyfish, almost died. But anyway, I think, you know, if you look at just the execution of the product or what that actually was, it was basically a simple website with an uploader, but there was no expectation from us that it would be so large. You know, I think the agency went on to win 3 Cannes Awards for it, and I kind of put Australia sort of tourism on the map there. So I guess the takeaway from that is like the emotion side of design, right? It was like, I guess there was enough people there that wanted to escape their day-to-day life, and that was really, if we'd given away a car or $100,000, you know, I don't think it would have been the same. So just remember to keep the emotion in there for people.
I think that what you're talking about can actually even, I've experienced it a lot, even before releasing the product into the wild as an actual finished product, but in my earlier days in consulting, releasing the product as a designer to the engineering team, and the engineering team back to the client, and the client to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer through the process, through distribution, through the sales channel to the customer. And that's a whole string of playing telephone with people. And one of the reasons that I left consulting the first time around was because I wanted to close that gap, because even before it left my hands, I realized it was mutating along the way. Mm-hmm. So really being there and shepherding it all the way along through. Later on, it became a part of my process to not try to control fully how the consumer or end user engages with the product, but instead to try to design opportunity and possibility into the product itself, and allow room for that delightful surprise of, I was not anticipating somebody using this in that way, to come back and actually be a net benefit to the user and ultimately to the company.
Can you think of a specific example of that, like from Jimmy Jane? I think we're all interested in new uses of your products.
The infinite permutations of sexuality. I think that that's where it really came to the fore for me. First was this idea that if I were to run the capture and then do the computation and then the create, the problem is that, you know, at the most basic level, every one of our bodies is quite different, all the geometries and so on. And you could take the net average, but the average isn't necessarily the best. And instead of trying to get to that specific optimized geometry and so on, began to realize that in sexuality, it's maybe 20% that physiology, that geometry, but maybe 80% psychology. Our psychology, it's sort of the intellectual side and the emotional side of sexuality that's so important. And so really having the products be, again, quite a bit more general in their ultimate design, and therefore much more applicable to a whole host of uses. And so then we put these out into the world with some general, like, try this first and tell us what happens, and then we get a lot of interesting feedback back.
How about you, Jeff, with IdeaPaint? What happened with version 1 of your product?
Well, version 1 with our product went extremely well. Little sarcasm there. But one of the best decisions I think we ever made was when we launched the product, we viewed the product as a platform, and we wanted to make sure that the product was inherently a very strong and solid product so that the product disappeared into the background. People could use it in any way that they wanted to and be as creative with it as possible. And when we were setting out to launch the company, the one thing that we did not do was go out and say, I'll pick on Autodesk, you need to use IdeaPaint in this form because this is what you're going to get out of it. This is the way it's going to enhance the way that you work, create, and collaborate within your office space. Instead, what we did was we said, the company that we want to build is going to be influential in space design, collaborative work styles, and the way that people create and team. And we want to put the product in the hands of the people that think about that every single day. And for us, that was the architecture and design firms. And it was a giant bet that our company took because, for instance, if Autodesk decides to build a new facility and we get involved in the design process on the front end, the revenue doesn't come in for about 2 years until the building's built and the product gets purchased. But we felt so passionately in the beginning that what was going to catapult our brand and our product long term was to put it in the hands of the smartest designers in the world and see what they'd be able to create with it and learn from them and their best practices. So for the first 3 years of IdeaPaint, we did nothing but go around the world and meet with the top 3,000 architecture and design firms and work on marquee projects. And we were very open-minded in the approach and never put a stake in the ground and said, this is how you have to use it. Instead, it was an introduction and a collaborative process to see how people would use it and then share that knowledge with everybody else that was trying. And in the long run, it's worked out well for us because today we've been able to work on over 100,000 projects around the world with some of the most innovative companies. And our customers, in turn, have been a key part of our design process and built our brand and ended up building our product and the company that we are today.
Cool. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, version 1 is a misnomer. I don't even, in the software world, we don't have to have a version 1.
Right.
So, or even in the future of manufacturing, this thing where you can print one of them, right? So everything is version 1. If you put software out there, in the old days when I started this business, we would write software for 2 years before we shipped it, and you get a data point back, you missed it. And now, you put it out every day, and you get little feedback. So what is a version 1? Version 1 is tomorrow. And so bringing the customer in the whole time is a big part of what we try and do now. It's a big change for this company from where we've been, though.
Yeah. So can you guys share anything about some of the disasters? It's always interesting to hear about things that went wrong and how you made them better or how you survived at least.
I have one funny anecdote. When we launched IdeaPaint, again, if this room were painted in IdeaPaint, you would basically be able to write all over your walls, and you guys would hopefully be up and writing and collaborating and connecting with each other. So we worked on one marquee project for a customer that I won't name, and the project was beautiful. It was one of our first large-scale projects for a very innovative, trend-forward company, and it was a new campus. And IdeaPaint was everywhere, so we were waiting for this project to be unveiled because for us that was one of our first marquee big wins. And I walked into the facility about a month after the project was done, and I walked around with the people that were designing it, and there was no writing on the walls. And I started asking people how they were liking IdeaPaint, and nobody knew the walls were writable. And for me, it was, kind of a funny aha moment where, IdeaPaint in a room, the walls would look just like this. So you can walk around Autodesk, and they do. And nobody was using our product because it was an entirely new product category. They didn't know it existed, and they didn't know their walls were writable. So that kind of kicked off a process for us when a facility was introduced. We worked with the customer on kind of best practices, on tips and tricks of how you use IdeaPaint to empower your environment. We started making sure that we're kind of nudging them forward to make sure people were writing on the walls, and all it took was one person to write on the walls. Everybody felt like they did something wrong, and see it, erase smoothly for people to start adopting it quickly. But I never figured I would walk in, have the whole facility done with IdeaPaint, and nobody was using it just because they didn't know.
We have the opposite problem. The walls upstairs,
Yeah.
we've got all these white walls that people went to, but they were paint walls. So
Yeah, I've seen that.
we
in
need
a
the other
couple
product that
places.
lets us erase those.
Yep.
You've got a great product, because once you have it, then you really have to do the whole place or you get in trouble.
Me Too effect takes
Yeah.
off for sure.
How about you guys? Are you brave enough to share some of your disasters?
So disaster, probably the biggest one I would say personally, personalized ads, right? So everyone, those creepy ads that kind of know what you do. That was me. So startup, we kind of worked out some technology that could basically, store data and kind of make an intelligent decision about, hey, we know that you were looking at that camera yesterday, and maybe we're gonna try to sell you that now again on a different site or something. So, I guess the idea, the good intention was there that, hey, why don't we show you the right message at the right time? But unfortunately, it was never really the right time, in that it just kind of crossed that creepy boundary for people. They don't actually want to be followed and sort of maybe even known what they've been doing on the web. So kind of crossed that privacy boundary with people, and learned a lot about that in terms of human emotion, again, about what is okay and what is not with technology.
How about you guys? Ryan?
I'd reiterate that. I think the emotion is the big thing. The big miss is where you go in and try and deeply understand the customer problem, and then you get very intellectual about how to solve it. You deliver it, and emotionally, the customer isn't ready for that much change. We've seen this about 15 years ago, how you could take all of this data that architects working with the HVAC people and the carpeting and the painters and all the, there's thousands of companies are like, hey, let's use something like the internet and put the database in the center, and we're going to, synchronize and connect people and do like Dropbox and the internet and Google Maps and all of that stuff all together. And that was kind of this vision. We put it out there, and people didn't even know how to look at it. So, they weren't ready to make that kind of a shift overnight. It had to happen over a decade, and we're seeing it now. But, we invested a lot of money too soon, too far ahead, because we didn't really think of the emotional state or the readiness of all of the different players, the education that would be required. It was too intellectual.
So did you take those products off the market, or did they just have a very small use case for a number of years?
No, they came off the market. There's a number of early products that just didn't get enough traction.
Yeah.
They had to be reimagined, simplified, chunked up.
Cool. How about you, Ethan?
I think a lot of my failures can be traced back to this sort of the designer's hubris and this, and also I think maybe a misunderstanding as a consultant versus later on as a founder and as a person standing there in the factory in China watching things being manufactured. The misunderstanding being that I felt with, particularly in the early years of Jimmy Jane, that the more perfect I made the product, the stronger the company would be. And I had a very specific, magical sense of what perfection is as a designer. And I would, for me it was Alias. I would zoom in on Alias to a detail on the product I was designing, and I would literally tweak a radius from being 0.1 millimeters to 0.2 millimeters. Or my engineer would do that, and I would look at his work and I'd say, these don't match. So can you just zoom in a bit? And he'd be like, well, this one's 0.125 and this one's 0.1. I'm like, make it the same. And I think that there is a value in that level of detail of understanding, but the problem is that there is a different definition of perfection in the startup environment, and there's also an acknowledgement of the reality of the user out there in the world. And the biggest failure and near death of Jimmy Jane was around the Form 6 product, the first very sophisticated vibrator that we made that needed to be manufactured in Asia. And it was basically a beautiful concept that was ultimately almost completely impossible to manufacture. And that iterative loop of trying and pushing and pushing and pushing to try to achieve that perfection in the factories in China and failing and failing and failing was nearly the death of the company. So it wasn't funny. It's not a funny story. It's just it was a near death experience for the company and a near bankruptcy experience for me personally.
Yeah. In hindsight, would you simply not have undertaken that or released a raw, simpler product?
But thinking back to what Chris was saying about all the skill set that you need to launch a hardware business and to launch hardware products, I thought that I knew all of those things and I didn't. And I think thinking back, one of my first bosses actually said to me, I was working on a design in his firm, and he came over and he looked at it, and he knew from his experience that it wasn't going to work. And he said to me, "You need to smell more plastic." And what he meant was I needed to go to the factory and understand the repercussions of what I was doing. And I think that looking back, it would have been great to have had more time in the factory sooner. And I think that really needs to be part of the education.
So Ethan touches on an issue. I think Facebook's motto is move fast and break stuff, right? Is just get the product out there, however bad, let people use it, and then either iterate or throw it away. And then you've got a company like Apple on the other side, which will perfect things for 10 years and release it. What are the three other of you guys? Do you have any feelings about that moves, those poles of design philosophy?
Antenna gate.
Antenna gate, yeah.
That pretty much sums it up right there. I mean, yeah, if you don't get it out and test it, you're going to screw up. I mean, you might have a beautiful design and all that, but if to the point, does it really work? Can it really be manufactured? The only way you could tell is getting it in people's hands. I think that's just critical. That's what design is. You've got too many variables. You're not an MBA. You're not going to make a spreadsheet that's going to answer everything about this product. And to what your point, it's sometimes not even about the product. The way products are successful today is community. How do you build the community? I mean, you can have a crappy product and you can still sell a lot of it. It's the community is as important as the product, and being true to that. So, the Apple way is clearly worked, but I don't think that works for everybody, and I don't think that works for most companies. I think a safer way is to iterate your way to the solution.
How about you, Jeff? You took a long time to develop your product, right?
Yeah, we took quite a while to develop our product, and actually, building off of your point, we had an interesting experience. When we were first in development, or not first, kind of towards mid-stage, we were trying like crazy to develop a product that was kind of our gold standard. If all the stars aligned, this is exactly what we would have, something that we could put on the shelf at Pottery Barn or Home Depot or wherever, and my grandmother could apply it. What we learned was that was overly cumbersome for us as a startup with a limited budget and a limited time frame. And we developed a product at first that basically required the professional touch of a painter. Now, before we leap to, that's where we are now, where we're not. We're now at the product where my grandmother can apply it. But at the time, it was very scary for us because we had dreamed of this product that we could sell to the entire world. And what it forced us to do was refocus on, okay, we have a wonderful product. And now what is the market that it's applicable for? And for us, that was the new construction renovation market and the architecture and design space. And in those projects, there's always going to be a professional painter on site. We could go out there and make sure that we were working with them to ensure product quality. So what it forced us to do was realize where we were at as a company, realize that we weren't going to get our stars aligned product right away, but that we did have a wonderful product in an addressable market, and go out there and now launch that product, and as to what you said, focus now on overall customer experience. And I think, if you ask many people in the design industry what IdeaPaint's known for today is we dive into the projects, and if they're is a question or an issue, or they want design advice or whatever, our team is right there to help all the way through the process until the project's done, and then help ongoing. And that makes people trust the product and the company. And that's turned actually into our mainstay now, is getting involved in the entire user experience with a company when they're using our product and being as involved as possible. And the product itself has almost fallen into the background.
And I think it depends on the space that you're in, right? Like if you look at Kickstarter, I think people are willing to forgive early product if it's a new space, new product. There's, as you say, there's that community aspect to it. But if you're in an established space, I don't think you can really afford to make too many mistakes, right? It's like you do need to get that testing out in advance. You can't be living in your cave, sort of, worrying about your millimeters for years on end. You do need to get it out there and just make sure that you do have a reality check before you get it out into market.
Yeah. So to go in another direction, one that Brian talked about a little bit, we're now getting more and more data about products, particularly software products are now hundreds of data points, like per second, sometimes for users. So can you guys talk at all about how data that comes back about your products has affected them? And I think we all see tons of benefits, but also are there times where the data has warped you in the wrong direction rather than a direction that was better for the product?
I mean, I guess data can be seen as sort of a safety net, right? So no one wants to make the wrong choice. So sometimes found that in certain companies, executives will be bound by that data. They won't be willing to make a decision until the data's in, or if the testing doesn't come out conclusive one way or the other, then we'll just pause on that and kind of think about it once we know get some more data about that so we can be correct. So I think it can kind of be shackling. But that being said, just with a bit of data in terms of a recent example, Salesforce sent out an email campaign. We literally just changed the background color on a call to action. And it was 15% sort of different sort of uptake in the email click-through rate on that. So had we not run an A/B test and that's just the simplest example that I could come up with, one color change, 15% difference. I mean, it's huge. So data is there. I guess you just have to know how to interpret it and be able to make decisions off it, because it's not, I guess, let's call it information rather than data, right? Data by itself is not useful. It's only once you put your lens of an understanding of what that data actually means that you can help your business forward.
How about you guys? Any thoughts on data?
Data for us, it was having a very active internal customer service team that was on the phone and a very active Salesforce that was out in the stores. The stores aggregated data for us, which we would collect with those individuals. I mean, it's very manual. We made a decision very early on with Jimmy Jane, which actually first looked into the Internet of Sex things, essentially, before we were naming things the Internet of Things, back in 2002. And turned away from applying technology in an area where technology wasn't really the issue. And because we don't have all these sensor data points and all the sensor data coming in, it's really just real world interaction with our customers that's so critical. And the idea of outsourcing for a brand and that's really founded on a relationship with a consumer like Jimmy Jane, outsourcing customer service is just such an outlandish idea. And we saw that as just a huge opportunity for exactly that, for collection of data. And we learned, again, alarming and wonderful and charming things all the time.
Yeah. I think data, the way a lot of people talk about it in the press is it's the rearview mirror. It's about optimization, about a decision already made, and it can be useful there. The A/B testing, it's a great way to cut through politics in a company. There's a lot of politics, there's a lot of opinions, and data is a great way to optimize around that. Data is not necessarily great the way most people use it for innovation. It can give you some insights, and if you use it for that, I think it's great. So, I think what I was talking about data there is a little different. It's using data to push forward and go beyond just optimization. But you have to be careful of how good is the data. Data is a model. It's not reality.
I think for us, data's played in interesting role, and I'll go back to the customer service example. The idea of outsourcing customer service, I think, is ludicrous because that's your barometer for what's happening. And that's the barometer for how people are accepting your product and what's happening with it in the market. So for us, when we initially launched the product, people had a lot of questions. And we knew if one person had one question, there were 10 people out there that weren't asking us. And they had that same exact question. So we paid a lot of attention to what was happening with our customer experience team and the questions that were being asked in the field. And that ended up translating into the marketing and sales materials and conversations we were having in the market. And it's a very simple example. However, I think if we had done that improperly, there would have been a lot of people that had potentially poor experiences with the product. And that's not the product's fault. It was just because we weren't articulating certain points in our initial materials. And I could cite 20 different examples where that ended up saving us.
Fantastic. So I think we have some time to open up for questions to the panel. Would anybody here like to ask a question of the group? Yeah, right there. So I'll repeat the question. So she was asking Jeff from IdeaPaint, what are some of the ways you've used the product?
Yeah, the most common form is on the wall. So people are painting. It's funny. It started with people literally making a square and a new whiteboard on the wall, which was our absolute nightmare. It's like, we hate the whiteboard. We want to blow it up. A whiteboard literally puts a border around your creative thought process. Today, the standard for most of our customers is floor to ceiling, wall to wall, make the entire wall, and then all the walls in a conference room, office, and then an entire space dry erasable. And Salesforce is a great example of it, where they're also one of our largest customers, and they're now starting to adopt IdeaPaint not just on all four walls of the conference room and the private offices, but also in the hallways. And two great examples of it are, one, it's all about inspiring impromptu collaboration. So if you have a floor space just like this, and you only have 4 meeting rooms and then a couple other impromptu meeting areas throughout the space, what IdeaPaint will do is we'll go in and literally paint every single wall instead of having a total of 10 meeting spaces. You've now turned all these walls that are dormant space into functional space. You've created 20, 40, 50, 60 different meeting areas throughout. So then one of the other cooler examples of, from just a design standpoint of a space that we're seeing a lot of customers do is our product is available in white, yes, but clear. And the clear is being painted over every single color imaginable out there, but now a whole bunch of wood. So bamboos, plywoods, and different exotic woods, and you actually, create a nice, warm, beautiful space through incorporation of wood.
Other questions? Yeah.
It's true. You need the tools to be able to use it. So we do sell all the different accessories, but we are exploring partnerships. And one of the most interesting, some of the most interesting things we're working on is how you use the product. So we talk about the where and the how. The where is where you physically paint it, and how you empower the space through that. But arguably the most important is how do you use the product, and that's not just the markers and erasers and cleaners and so forth, but it could be some tools that Autodesk has. It could be different apps like an Evernote app. But how do you use this to quickly take the brainstorming and collaboration that happens in the physical world, get it into the digital world, and continue that workflow? So we're exploring partnerships if you have some ideas.
Yeah, and the green shirt back there. Anybody have a comments on short-term versus long-term goals and thinking?
I mean, one would hope that the short-term goals are in line with the overall vision of the company, right? Hopefully, there's been someone that's been thinking about where the ship is actually going, and you're meeting some milestones along that way. Definitely, I think you have to be pragmatic about prioritizing stuff, and like there may be a feature which the designers or the founder may be like that might be their pet idea. And hopefully some data along the way might actually, as we say, kind of get rid of some of those egos and actually help you decide on how to prioritize and make the right decisions along that way to make sure you do reach those end goals and not just, as you say, make that quarter or that bonus or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve in the short term.
I think there's been a few people over the years who've said that it's the one thing that distinguishes human beings from all other organisms is our ability to think long term. So. Yeah,
in the software industry, I mean, if you look at the entire software industry over the last 15 years, this whole move from a waterfall to an agile type process, all the companies I know that have these huge 10-year visions or 3-year, if you go to GE, it's amazing some of their vision, they work in a 2-week sprint, right? You take a 10-year vision and you split it into 2 weeks and you get data as to whether you're on the right path or not.
Yeah, I read a great article about the founder of Pandora, and they said they settled on a cycle where they would all get together, come up with the ideas for their 3-month sprint, and then narrow it down to a few with a small group. However, they never looked back. They never took any of the other ideas into the next sprint, but always start from scratch. And I thought that really reflected the way design thinking and engineering thinking has evolved.
I found it interesting. Read recently, I think last week, that Amazon does a bunch of testing, and they're saying that in order to test with 5,000 users, they only need to turn that feature on for 45 seconds. So once you scale out to that big, you can get some pretty amazing testing. Netflix sort of does the same, but I found that amazing. 45 seconds.
Okay, other questions? Blue shirt there. Right. That's a good one.
They shouldn't be intimidating at all. Go to the Maker Faire. Heck, you're in the Bay Area. You got the world's largest Maker Faire in San Mateo every year, and go rub elbows with all those people. Get on the web and look at the Maker community. A lot of the tools for doing this stuff for education are free. And education, educators, mentors, that doesn't mean like you have to be at a university when I say education. It pretty means anybody who's in a learning state, which means you're home. Oh, I'm a student of design. It's free to that. And there's just the resources that are out there are just huge. So if you get Make Magazine, if you get any of there's just I don't even know where to start. But it should not be intimidating. Don't be intimidated. The whole Arduino movement that Chris was talking about, my kids love that. There's just a ton of stuff. Geek Dad.
Yeah, especially in the Bay Area. I mean, I met a guy at
meetups.
Yeah, I met a guy at Bootcamp who does a one-day workshop on synthetic biology. Like by the end of the workshop, you can just go get a new drug printed and sent back to you and see how it feels.
And
that's about it. Have we run out of time? Yeah. Okay, that's it. Thanks, everybody.